August 13, 2025, in the tense southern corridor near Gaza, Hamas launches a daring attack. 80 suicide drones loaded with explosives descend from the night sky, suddenly attacking a half-mile-long Israeli military train carrying fuel, weapons, and food. At the same time, 30 motorcycles carrying 60 heavily armed fighters rush toward the convoy, firing wildly at the train's hull. Their mission: to paralyze a vital route to a strategic Israeli base, take soldiers hostage, and seize millions of sophisticated weapons. Hamas believes the plan is perfect. Little do they know, they don't know that in the next few hours, they will pay a very high price for this decision. Overhead, 50 Israeli reconnaissance drones hover, tracking every move in real time. On the ground, 5,000 elite soldiers with armored vehicles and sniffer dogs silently close in. Below them, satellites are mapping hundreds of miles of tunnels, preparing to flatten the base. Will Hamas hold on to its victory, or have they brought about their own destruction? Will the Israeli military's plans be discovered? Join me in discovering the truth. At 04:17 a.m. on August 13, 2025, the desert silence along Israel's southern rail corridor was ripped apart by one of the most audacious Hamas attacks in recent memory. A military supply train, 22 cars long, stretching nearly half a mile, was moving steadily toward a fortified base near Gaza. Inside its carriages lay the lifeblood of a combat brigade: 320 tons of diesel fuel, 120 tons of ammunition, 45 tons of rations, and more than 50 million worth of precision-guided weapon systems. In military terms, enough to keep 4,000 soldiers in the fight for nearly 3 weeks. But Hamas was waiting. Out of the night sky, 80 explosive-laden suicide drones dove in unison. Each carried a warhead of just 20 pounds, but multiplied together, the swarm delivered the equivalent of 1.6 tons of TNT, comparable to a small tactical airstrike. The first detonations struck the fuel cars. Tens of thousands of gallons of diesel erupted in a sheet of fire, launching a fireball nearly 300 feet high. The heat was so intense, measured at over 3,000 degrees, that satellite sensors later registered it from orbit. The escort section of the train was next. 2 armored cars carrying 40 Israeli soldiers were ripped open as drones punched through their plating. Shrapnel tore through the compartments, scattering metal fragments traveling at over 2,000 miles per hour. Survivors stumbled from the wreckage into a maelstrom of fire and smoke, with more drones screaming down overhead. In just under 120 seconds, what had been a secure supply convoy had become a burning skeleton on rails. Then came the ground assault. From dirt tracks and orchards nearby, 30 motorcycles thundered forward. Each carried 2 Hamas fighters armed with AK-74 rifles, RPG-7 rocket launchers, and belt-fed machine guns. 60 heavily armed militants in total. Moving at nearly 55 miles per hour, they closed the distance with shocking speed. Their mission was not just to destroy, but to board the train, capture Israeli troops, and steal advanced weapons. In less than 5 minutes, Israel's southern steel artery had been transformed from a routine logistics run into a war zone. Fuel cars burned like torches. Ammunition threatened to cook off, and the night air trembled with the sound of engines, explosions, and gunfire. The battlefield had arrived without warning, and the cost of hesitation could be catastrophic. If you were Israel's top commander, would you have launched the attack, or would you have waited for them to return to base and destroyed the entire base? The inferno along the tracks was still raging when the first encrypted alerts reached Tel Aviv. Within 4 minutes of the attack, Israel's Southern Command convened an emergency war council. On the table were numbers that chilled even seasoned officers: a half-mile supply train crippled, 40 soldiers unaccounted for, and more than $50 million in cargo at risk of falling into enemy hands. Hamas had staged an operation on a scale unseen in years, and if left unanswered, it threatened to unravel Israel's frontline posture near Gaza. The response was immediate, calculated, and overwhelming. Israel's Air Force scrambled 50 reconnaissance UAVs, each equipped with ultra-high-resolution thermal cameras capable of detecting a human body from 15 miles away. Linked through secure satellite relays, these drones fanned out across the skies of southern Israel and northern Gaza. Within 11 minutes, their feeds painted a shocking picture. The motorcycle raiders and captured supplies were moving toward a labyrinth of underground tunnels, disappearing into Hamas's fortified strongholds. The cost of hesitation was measured in lives and days of combat endurance. Intelligence analysts estimated that if Hamas retained even 20% of the stolen munitions, it could fuel weeks of ambushes, rocket attacks, and cross-border raids, potentially inflicting hundreds of Israeli casualties. That was unacceptable. High Command authorized Operation Iron Hounds. The objective was not only to recover what had been stolen, but to annihilate the infrastructure that made such an attack possible. Every second mattered. As the 50 drones shadowed the militants, their sensors locked onto 6 separate tunnel entrances, each no more than 800 yards from civilian neighborhoods. That proximity forced Israel's leaders to calculate with precision. neutralize Hamas without dragging innocents into the fire. The battlefield had shifted from the burning rails to the shadows beneath Gaza, and Israel was preparing to hunt its enemy where they felt safest. Support us by liking and subscribing. And now the Hamas army's lair is clearly visible. By 4:39 a.m., Israel's War Council had already escalated from reconnaissance to mobilization. A single command, Iron Hounds deploy, set an entire strike force in motion. From fortified bases in the south, 45 Namer armored personnel carriers, 18 Merkava 4 tanks, and 12 heavily armed engineering vehicles rolled out. Inside this steel column were 5,000 elite troops, a combined force equal to an entire combat brigade. In terms of firepower, they carried more ordnance than some nations deploy in a month-long campaign. Among them marched a unique vanguard, 60 military working dogs, each equipped with helmet-mounted 4K cameras, infrared sensors, and biometric trackers. Valued at nearly $50,000 apiece after years of specialized training, these animals were worth more than gold, able to squeeze through tunnels narrower than 18 inches. Linked to a satellite uplink, their camera feeds streamed at 10 gigabytes per minute, enough data to map every turn and chamber of Hamas's subterranean strongholds in real time. The convoy halted in the shadows just 6.2 miles from Gaza's border, engines cut, optics switched to night vision. Overhead, Israel's ERA C-3 spy satellite locked onto suspected tunnel entrances. Analysts estimated Hamas's tunnel network stretched nearly 350 miles underground, 10 times the length of Manhattan Island. If even half of those passages were active, they could conceal up to 8,000 fighters, dozens of weapons depots, and command bunkers buried 90 feet below the surface. The numbers painted a sobering picture: a hidden fortress large enough to house a city, guarded by militants armed with thousands of rifles, hundreds of RPG launchers, and stockpiles of Iranian-supplied rockets. Yet the Israeli strike force advanced methodically, armed with seismic ground sensors, fiber optic scopes, and AI-powered mapping tablets designed to convert chaos into a blueprint. By the time the first rays of dawn skimmed the horizon, 5,000 soldiers lay in silent positions, while their canine scouts slipped into tunnels ahead. Israel was about to launch one of the most ambitious subterranean assaults in modern history, an operation where every second, every heartbeat carried the weight of victory or disaster. Don't leave yet, this is the destruction of the Hamas army. The silence ended at 05:11 a.m. when the strike order was given. For nearly half an hour, 5,000 Israeli soldiers had waited in position, their nerves coiled like springs. Now the battlefield lit up with sudden fury. The first salvo came from dozens of shoulder-fired grenade launchers. In less than 10 seconds, over 300 high-explosive grenades streaked into Hamas positions near the tunnel entrances. The blast tore open bunkers and collapsed makeshift barricades, scattering militants who had no idea how thoroughly they were being watched. Panic spread as the second phase began. Above the battlefield, 350 loitering munitions, small UAVs fitted with 10-pound high-explosive charges and nose-mounted cameras, dove at terrifying precision. Guided by live-streaming video feeds, they selected targets with surgical accuracy. One drone veered straight into a machine gun nest, vaporizing its crew in a blast equivalent to 5 hand grenades detonating at once. Another UAV plummeted into a group of fighters trying to regroup around an RPG launcher. In under 3 minutes, more than 60 Hamas militants were neutralized, their positions erased before they could mount a coordinated defense. But Israel's planners had prepared for more than open skirmishes. The most devastating blows struck deep underground. Using the reconnaissance gathered by K9 scouts and satellite tracking, Israeli operators unleashed 50 specialized bunker buster drones. Unlike ordinary quadcopters, these machines carried shaped charge warheads capable of cutting through 3 feet of reinforced concrete. When detonated, the copper-lined cones created plasma jets at 30,000 feet per second, hot enough to pierce underground command rooms like paper. Within minutes, the main Hamas operations chamber, buried nearly 90 feet below ground, was consumed in a fireball. Dozens of laptops, radios, and encrypted servers were obliterated, along with the commanders inside. Technology amplified every strike. Israel's battlefield network, powered by AI-driven targeting software, analyzed thermal and acoustic signatures in real time. This meant soldiers weren't firing blindly into tunnels. They were hitting living, breathing targets. Seismic ground sensors detected vibrations from footsteps and weapon movements, then relayed coordinates to operators above. Within seconds, drone pilots redirected their warheads to intercept the signals. Hamas fighters attempting to maneuver underground suddenly found themselves targeted by machines that could hear them move. The destruction was staggering. A fuel depot hidden in a cavernous tunnel chamber erupted when hit by a precision drone, igniting nearly 20,000 gallons of diesel. The resulting explosion registered 2.1 on the Richter scale, shaking the ground like a minor earthquake. Further along, a munitions stockpile of over 200 RPG warheads and 15,000 rounds of ammunition was incinerated in a single strike, producing secondary explosions that roared for nearly 7 continuous minutes. Above ground, the effect was immediate and psychological. Surviving militants fired wildly into the smoke, their weapons rattling against empty air. But every time a muzzle flash was detected, an Israeli UAV adjusted its flight path and struck within 6 seconds. It was a display of overwhelming precision. Man against machine, panic against calculation. By sunrise, the tunnel network was collapsing into chaos. Walls cracked, fuel burned, ammunition detonated, and communications fell silent. What Hamas had built over 15 years of smuggling, tunneling, and training was being dismantled in less than 45 minutes of relentless assault. For Israel's commanders, the message was clear. The underground fortress was no longer untouchable. It was a trap that had just been turned inside out. By 6:02 a.m., the underground fortress was a graveyard of fire and shattered steel, but the operation was far from over. As the last UAV detonations faded, Israel unleashed the full weight of its ground force. 5,000 elite soldiers poured into the tunnel complex, methodically clearing every chamber, corridor, and ventilation shaft. The sweep was brutal in its efficiency. In less than 90 minutes, over 1,100 Hamas fighters were confirmed killed in close-quarters combat. Another 500 militants, disoriented by smoke and shockwaves, surrendered with their weapons still slung across their backs. The rest fled into blind tunnels only to be cornered and captured by Israeli squads using biometric scanners and fiber optic scopes. The payoff was staggering. Troops recovered dozens of Israeli soldiers taken hostage during the train ambush, pulling them alive from makeshift prison cells deep underground. Crates of stolen weapons, more than $50 million in rifles, rockets, and ammunition, were seized intact. Even more devastating for Hamas, 6 entire tunnel branches totaling nearly 12 miles were rigged with explosives and collapsed, permanently erasing years of construction. When the dust settled, the cost of Hamas's gamble was clear. An entire command hub destroyed, hundreds of fighters neutralized, and their most valuable underground base reduced to rubble. For Israel, it was more than a recovery. It was a statement. The message echoed from the tunnels to every hostile group watching. No ambush, no fortress, and no weapon could outlast Israel's reach. By the time the sun climbed fully over Gaza, the battlefield told a story no press release could soften. A supply train once seen as a symbol of vulnerability had become the bait that lured Hamas into overreach and their annihilation. In less than 2 hours of coordinated action, Israel transformed disaster into decisive victory. 5,000 soldiers storming tunnels, more than 1 million militants eliminated or captured, dozens of hostages freed, and over $50 million in stolen weapons reclaimed. The underground labyrinth, once hailed by Hamas as an impenetrable fortress, now lay in ruins, its walls collapsed, and its command structure erased. The numbers alone were staggering. 12 miles of tunnels destroyed, 20,000 gallons of fuel ignited, and a base built over 15 years reduced to rubble in 45 minutes. Yet beyond the statistics, the true impact was psychological. Hamas had gambled that chaos and surprise could outweigh Israel's discipline and technology. Instead, the operation proved the opposite. Israel's fusion of intelligence, precision drones, satellite tracking, and ground forces created a battlefield where failure was mathematically impossible. For Hamas, the attack ended in humiliation. For Israel, it was more than a military win. It was a warning carved in smoke and steel. The message rang clear to every adversary in the region. Ambushes can be planned, tunnels can be dug, weapons can be smuggled. But in the end, Israel will find, strike, and destroy. Always.